Hi, it's been a minute. I hope everybody is doing well. I'm doing pretty well, but I have been reading, as I've been talking about. I've been reading a lot, and I am reading something right now that has really got me thinking about some things, so I just wanted to hop on and share. But my friends and I went camping this week, which was really fun, and I just love being out in the woods and stuff. Uh, anyway, but I just grabbed a secondhand copy of Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir because I knew that it would be fast paced and a quick read, and I just wanted a paperback that I wasn't too worried about. So I went to my local secondhand bookshop and got this. Um, and I had read, so okay, when I was in high school, I saw The Martian with my dad in the movie theater because we both love sci fi. And I just very distinctly remember seeing that movie with him and really enjoying it. And then I think last year, maybe, I read The Martian for the first time, which was really interesting. So, Andy Weir, the author of this book, um, and obviously The Martian, and another book called Artemis, and a short story called The Egg, potentially some other things that I just haven't heard of or read yet. But anyway, super sci fi writer. Like, and by that I mean he's obviously very interested in all kinds of different science, biology, physics, you know, mechanical engineering. Like he clearly knows a lot and does a ton of research and really loves like hard science. Uh and The Martian apparently was written just like serialized online, and he would post chapters of it and people would give him feedback and stuff. And then eventually he compiled it into a full-on novel that got released and got made into this big movie with Matt Damon, and kind of launched his career as a writer, more into the mainstream. And then Project Hail Mary was obviously the talk of the town this past like year because they made the movie with Ryan Gosling, which was quite successful and people really loved, and apparently had some really cool like puppetry and stuff with the alien that's in it. Anyway, but I okay, so this is part of the reason why like I really wanted to not work in digital media anymore, because now I'm reading this and I'm interested in it. And so I know the conversation has kind of moved on, but I am just now getting into this, and I kind of like getting into things when they're not um or like I don't know, I just am drawn to things in my own time. So sometimes I like, being a part of the conversation that's happening right now. Like I just went to see the Odyssey, and I'll talk about that in a second. But for some reason, like this, I just was doing other things at the time that it was popular. So now I'm talking about it. And I like that I can kind of just do whatever I want because this is my fucking YouTube channel or whatever. Anyway, okay. So, um, the thing that was kind of on my mind when I started reading this book is that there was a quote that had come out from Andy Weir, this author, when Project Hail Mary was in its media cycle. And I have the quote pulled up. This is the most research I've ever done for one of these videos. So exciting, I know. But he basically went on a podcast. So let's see, when was this article published? So this was published March 30th, 2026 on Gizmodo. Headline: Andy Weir says Paramount rejected his Star Trek pitch, proceeds to blast modern Trek. But essentially, he was on an episode of the Critical Drinker podcast, um, where he was talking about Project Hail Mary and apparently this whole thing about Star Trek, which has a long history, obviously, in the nerd space, in the fandom space. Star Trek was like the first big fandom to have fan fiction and conventions and cosplayers like that. There's a long storied history there. But Star Trek also has a huge history of being incredibly progressive in its sort of politics and the way that it talks about and views sci-fi. I've actually never seen a full episode of the original Star Trek, or any, like I saw the movies with Chris Pine and all of that, but I need to go back and do the original. I've just been on a big sci-fi kick this year. I did some classics and now I'm back in the sci-fi thing. So Um, anyway, sorry, it's warm. I'm sweating. Okay. So I won't get into the Star Trek of it all right now. Clearly that's another conversation. But Project Hail Mary. So let me just read you the quote that Weir said. Okay. I dislike social commentary. Like, I really hate it. When I'm reading a book, I just want to be entertained, not preached at by the author. Plus, it ruins the wonder of the story if I know the author has a political or social axe to grind. I no longer speculate about all possible outcomes of the story because I know for a fact that the universe of that book will conspire to ensure that the author's political agenda is validated. I hate that. I put no politics or social commentary into my stories at all. Anyone who thinks they see something like that is reading into it on their own. I have no point to make, and I'm not trying to affect the reader's opinion on anything. My sole job is to entertain, and I stick to that. To that end, I also don't talk about my personal political opinions publicly. I don't want readers to even know, honestly. I don't want that in the back of their minds as they read my stuff. Andy Weir. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack in that quote. I think the most obvious thing is that like a lot of people were really upset when he said this, especially because this is a book about saving humanity. You know, the premise is that the sun is dying because there's this sort of algae kind of growing in space. And so this high school science teacher kind of finds himself in the circumstances of like being the one to go into deep space and travel out there and try and, you know, work out this plan to save humanity. I am this far. I'm like 250 pages in. Yeah, exactly 250 pages. What is really striking is how there's so much politics in this. And okay, where do I need to start here? Because defining what politics are is kind of its own thing. And then also the point I'm going to make with this conversation that I'm having right now with my camera and myself and you, if you're watching this or whatever, is that art has entirely different functions depending on who you ask and depending on the scenario. And to me, what's incredibly interesting is how art functions differently, um, depending on all those different variables, right? And what we want it to be. So keep that in mind. But okay, so, you know, in order to not contrive, but to place this character in the scenario where he's out in space and he's doing these things, there is a lot of political stuff that has to happen, right? So essentially there's this character who has clearance from every single governing body, basically to do whatever she wants to get this project to a place where they can do what they need to do without any overhead. And I've known a lot of engineers and programmers and like very science minded people. I've worked in the games industry previously, so I know a lot of people who kind of exist in this world to an extent. I don't know a lot of like biologists or mechanical engineers, but like again, coders, like sciencey people, right? And it's a strongly held belief by a lot of them that the government and these regulating bodies just need to get the fuck out of the way so that they can do what they want without the red tape. And it's perfectly understandable because, you know, their values and the things that they want are progress above all else. However, those protocols, as frustrating as they can be and as, you know, they can kind of be dead weight when you're trying to move towards a goal, right? As a scientist, like those were put in place hopefully to protect people and work in the interest of people. And again, no system is perfect. In fact, it's an incredibly flawed system, but like, you know, red tape is there for a reason. So it's really interesting to me that we're in a narrative scenario here where like the fantasy for the scientist is that there's absolutely no red tape and they can do whatever they need whenever they need without any kind of clearance. And it's very clear that Andy Weir is so passionate about science. And you see in this character Ryland Grace, who is a teacher and really enjoys knowing things and teaching them to these kids and all of that. And then when he meets, spoiler alert for fucking Hail Mary, when he meets an alien and they're able to start communicating, and they are really excited to learn about each other's biology and technology and the way they communicate. Like there's a real childlike enthusiasm, and you see it too when Ryland Grace like encounters other scientists around the world. There's like a scene where they're in a conference room and they're trying to have a meeting about what they're gonna do or whatever, and there's like this Russian scientist that Ryland is like, they're both just nerding out about something, and he says to him like, I want to hang out with you, let's get a drink, and it's kind of like this endearing moment. So there's a lot of the sort of enthusiasm and love for and passion for science underpinning this story, which is not a surprise, and it is endearing. Like it makes you excited to learn about this stuff because so much of Weir's writing is just hard sci, like it's very hard sci-fi, and he, I will say, has really good characters and great pacing, so it's much more readable. I just finished The Three Body Problem, which is a translation from Chinese, which is already kind of hard to for me. Like I love a lot of interiority, a lot of character, and I have found just in my own personal experience reading translations from Asian languages, those stories are much more like plot focused. They're much more focused on um, narrative structure as a means of like, it's more mechanical than like a very emotional, which I'm sure most of that is just lost in translation anyway. That's just my experience reading it as a native English speaker, not knowing the language of origin of those translations. Right? Okay. But anyway, Weir is really focused on a lot of the sciencey stuff, and you get character more so in this one. Like, okay, so a lot of people like Hail Mary more than The Martian, because The Martian, you only have one guy, and his commentary is fun and kind of like quippy when he's talking about the things that he's doing. But Hail Mary, you have another character in Rocky to kind of bounce off of, which does give it a little bit more, excuse me, depth of character and stuff. Okay, so to me, let's get back to my point because I've kind of gone on a tangent, as I tend to do. But to me, Hail Mary is just a really fascinating cultural artifact when paired with this statement from Weir, because we are in a very politically rife moment, I think is an apt descriptor of where we're at right now. And art is in such a weird spot because I think art has been so politicized and I think really flattened out to like, this is either a statement for my team or the opposing team. Like art feels like it has been flattened down to a product of like the tribalism that we're kind of feeling right now on a large scale. And so I think a lot of people, again, like with this sort of reduction in people's ability to, I think critically about art and literature and all those things, people really look to something and say, does this aesthetically align with my sort of like the way I embody my political identity? So for example, again, I'll get back to the Odyssey in a second, but like seeing the casting of Elliot Page as anybody in the Odyssey, which there was like a rumor that he was cast as Achilles, who's not even in the Odyssey anyway, and he, you know, ended up having a smaller role and all of that. But you know, people just seeing a trans person cast in a movie at all is enough for them to say this is woke, this is bullshit, no thank you, and like get angry about that, right? Whereas, oh man, there's so many things I could say. It's what's the point I'm trying to make, Noelle? Focus. Whereas like I just want people to be able to come to something and say like, I want to have an experience. Like this doesn't have to, and this is a conversation. Sorry, the ADHD is really getting to me right now. I'm trying to form a real like concrete thought. There's like some essay or some quote, and I need to find the original one because I quote it all the fucking time. If I can find it, I'll put it in the description of this video. But there was some essay that I found or like saw online. This is another product of like, I hate the social media age because it's so hard to find sources for things and quote things because everything is just so fast, and often like doesn't have sources and things, right? So okay, but this sort of idea that we've been politically castrated so much as a people, and feel so powerless that like people feel the only way that they can be politically active is through, you know, their dollar and through the way that they engage with things, and that extends to art. And this idea that like if I'm engaging with something and I'm giving it my money and my attention, that I'm endorsing it. And I say all the time that engagement does not equal endorsement. And I think, you know, in a time that is so anti-intellectual and so anti-art, for the sake of like having a new experience and being challenged and pushing yourself with new ideas, like you can sit and read something, and that doesn't mean that you are adopting it as part of your personhood and part of your ideology. Like that's not how it works. So you know, I just get really frustrated when people are like, "Oh, well this thing has this thing," and I can't deal with, you know, again, coming from a religious background, like if something had swearing in it, for example, that was like what that was where the conversation started and ended. Oh, it was good, but it just had all this language. It's like, okay, yeah, you don't have to say those words, and you hearing those words is like, why are you letting that bother you so much? Like, let's talk about anything else about this. Like, that's the least interesting part of this story. Like, anyway. So, I just find it so interesting that Weir is like, so much of this book is them talking about climate change, is them talking about, you know, these nations coming together and doing these things. And it's the conversation of like art versus artist too, because I was talking about this book and someone was like, well, I thought you said you didn't like Andy Weir because he said that thing. And it's like, well, I don't agree with the thing that he said, but I still want to read this book. I'm still enjoying it. I think it has a lot of interesting ideas. And two, like, it's just, again, like, this was more interesting to me after hearing what Weir said, because, you know, it goes, really the point I'm trying to get back to is that we're talking about what the function of art is, right? Like, so to Weir, this is not a political book at all. And that's not to say that it doesn't have politics in it, right? Again, for all the reasons I've just talked about, the climate change thing, the different governments being able to work together internationally, and all of those things. You know, I am of the belief that it is impossible to write something that does not have some kind of reflection of something political, because, you know, you didn't fall out of a fucking coconut tree. Like, we exist in the context and the cultures of the societies and the governments and the politics that we were raised in. So, you know, it's impossible to detach ourselves from those things. But let's talk about what Andy Weir is actually saying. And this is the thing that people miss, right? Like, this is, people just hear him say that and go, oh, blah, 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 which I still disagree with him, but I know what he's trying to say, which is that he does not want his art to be in the like culture war conversation, right? Of like, you know, whether or not there's enough marginalized people represented, or, you know, gender, or what, like, he, again, I'm making a lot of assumptions, but just reading his work, like, I get a sense of the kind of person he is, I feel. And he is just he's a scientist, and he loves science, and he doesn't want to have the culture war conversation, like, I think, dominate what he is talking about art as entertainment, right? Like, he wants to entertain people, he wants them to have a good time reading this. And I think in a lot of ways, which is probably more subconscious, I think he wants people to engage with the science that he's presenting through this narrative. That's what's fun about sci-fi, is that, like, I don't really care about science, but when you present it in a narrative form, it's way more fun. You know, and clearly I'm more interested in it than I thought, because I've been reading so much sci-fi. But the thing is, when you put a piece of art out into the world, you can't control how people engage with it. And again, like, you're always saying something. You're always saying something whether or not you are necessarily intending to. And as a scientist, and you have, a character who's weeping because he's had to, again, spoilers, but like, set off nukes to increase the greenhouse gases to give Earth a head start because the sun is cooling and all those things, like, that's, it's political. So anyway, it's, and then, him railing on Star Trek and saying, I don't want people preaching at me. And I do understand what he's saying there. Like, it's pretty clear when it feels like the narrative is coming to a halt or is being contrived to like make a point at you and like preachy. And there is no like perfect way to tell a story. I think too, like, a lot of especially sciencey people come to art with like a scientific approach almost, and they have this idea of like, I think optimization is such a big thing for a lot of people like that. And the thing about art, again, is that it is so imprecise and it's so subjective and it's so like, everybody's going to feel differently about something. But I do think it becomes, people can feel when something feels like a contrivance as opposed to like a natural sort of something that an artist is trying to convey with like, I think for the most part people can feel when people are being genuine at the end of the day. And so I don't know, it's, I'm really dancing around what I'm trying to, the conclusion I'm trying to come to. But I guess the point is like, Weir sees art as, he wants to make entertaining art. That's his thing. And I think it just rubs a lot of people the wrong way right now because, especially as a scientist, you want to feel like uh, someone's on the right side of history, I guess is a way to put it. And it's baffling to see scientists want to not have that conversation and only use the context of their story as a means of entertainment when it ripples back to all of these inherent meanings of like what this current moment means for people. Like, again, all of the climate change stuff and all of that's in here, like, that's such a real fear that people have. So I don't know, to kind of dismiss it and say that that's not important and you don't want to have that conversation, is, it just feels like it's in bad taste. But again, like, Weir is very clear that he doesn't want to be part of like the culture war conversation, which could, point to the fact that maybe he leans conservative in certain ways that he knows people won't like, or he's just scared of the sort of cancel culture of it all, which is kind of not really a thing anyway, because conservatives who've been canceled like still get to have platforms and make money and doing their things just through a different avenue. But that's another conversation for another day. Anyway, so I just think it's just really fascinating that he said that. And two, like, it's clear that he's a very smart man and is a great scientist and a pretty good novelist. But to like say something that is as tone deaf as that, just about not wanting art to be political, I think is fascinating. And so I also saw the Odyssey this past week in IMAX, which was a really cool experience, and I enjoyed it. I do like Nolan's movies quite a bit, even though they're certainly not perfect. They're very male centered, which, like, yeah, he's Christopher Nolan. That's the kind of stuff that he writes. But the spectacle is great, and it's cool to see people like wanting to go to the movies and like enjoy the art and all of that. But this also kind of goes back to like the larger conversation about what the purpose of art is. And two, I saw another creator, again, I don't remember the fucking video because it was just a video. I think I have it saved. Again, I'll put it in the description if I can find it. But the conversation of like, we don't have like culture right now. No one's like creating culture because all we do is commentary and then commentary about the commentary. And so now when stuff comes out, it's not just, oh, this movie came out, this is so exciting. It's like everybody has, you have the people, the outrage bait, like the rage bait, stuff of like the casting of, God forbid a black woman plays Helen of Troy. Oh my God, which don't get me started about that, because people are just weird. But, like, and the argument there being like, well, it's not historically accurate. And, I see, oh yeah, like apparently Elon Musk like said that he was going to use AI to make a historically accurate version of the Odyssey by the end of the year, which is just so fucking stupid on its face, but also like, again, it's such a literal, like, if we're doing the Odyssey, it has to be historically accurate. And the thing about this story is that we've been telling it for 3,000 years or whatever, and every interpretation is through an artist or a team's like specific artistic lens, like their idea of that. And it's very clear that the Odyssey is in conversation with some of Nolan's other more recent work, especially something like Oppenheimer. People are kind of pulling on this theme of like, we have fundamentally changed the nature of the world through the, sort of lens of being really selfish people. Like humans have, altered the status quo, and how can we ever put the world back to where it was? How do we live in a world that we have disgraced so fundamentally? Which is like a thing to say right now. Like that's, so I think Nolan was pretty successful in telling the story of the Odyssey through his own artistic interpretive lens, while still being able to say something about right now. Sometimes I think it's a little clumsy. Sometimes I think it's a little heavy-handed, but I and it's obviously very male-centered, and is it the story of a great man, which again is, true to the source material. This idea of like great men who are war heroes and all of that. That's another sort of trope and archetype to unpack in another video or writing someday or whatever. But with all of my caveats, like I do think that the Odyssey was a really fun theater viewing experience, and I think it's a pretty good entry in Nolan's filmography and all of that. So, but I guess again, going back to my point and my thesis of this video is that everybody came to it. It's not, again, it's not just people going to the theater and seeing a movie and kind of going about their way. There's so much meta commentary about these, films and pieces of art in general before they even arrive. And there's a whole ecosystem online. I know because I worked in it for 8 years of digital media, of, catchy, sort of baity headlines, and the conversation of what it means, and how it fits into people's different ideologies, really. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Nolan is such a big deal right now, because he makes such a big deal about using practical effects. And I feel like the conversations around how the film was made are just as important about the movie itself. And you talk about all of the praise that the composer is getting right now, which so sorry, I don't know his name off the top of my head. It's a very easy Google search away. But he, recreated all of these ancient instruments that we don't even have any surviving, versions of, and made the film score approximating what the instruments of the time that the Odyssey was written, would have actually sounded like. Which is, people love that stuff, the human effort and the authenticity. Like that's, something that AI probably wouldn't think to do, right? In its current state. So, the Odyssey is just right now, such a fascinating cultural artifact at the moment, because it says a lot about what people want from art right now. And again, Nolan is not trying to make something that is historically accurate. The casting and all of that is very reflective of what he wanted this project to be. And the modern clothing, and like we love anachronism, and trying to paint a picture through Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet is a great example of that. Like it's such a strong artistic vision through picking and choosing how we want to do everything, and maintaining the original language but keeping the costuming and the setting like more modern. And Like we've always done shit like this. We love to piecemeal things, and we love to um I don't know, I'm a big believer that like art, when you're creating something, you have all of your different things at your disposal. So if we're talking about a film, you have your actors, you have your sets, you have your score, you have the cinematography and the way you frame things, you have costumes and um, format and aspect ratio, everything. And I think great artists take every single possible thing at their disposal and crank it up to 11, in terms of creating a cohesive artistic vision. I think a great example of this off the top of my head is the video game Hades by Supergiant. Everything is so polished, down to like the UI when you're scrolling through a menu. It's just so like Hades, like you know it when you see it, you know? So anyway, um yeah, I'm just thinking a lot about what the purpose of art is, especially right now. I don't know if any of what I said was cohesive or coherent. Again, I think what Weir said was not in great taste right now. I understand what he's saying, which is, he just wants to create a story that is entertaining. Like he wants to detach the narrative from the real world associations of politics again, but you have to evoke those things in order to create the setting of your story, right? It reads like a fantasy of a scientist, which is like, again, not having any of the red tape, being able to do all the sciencey things without having to worry about the associations or consequences of those things, which is just, again, really interesting. He is a novelist, but he really comes at things from a scientific perspective, which is very utilitarian. And I don't think it's a coincidence that a lot of capitalists and scientists and stuff love like Ayn Rand. I was listening to something about objectivism and someone critiquing Ayn Rand and her beliefs and that whole thing of like, but that idea of like, get the fuck out of my way and let me do what I need to do because I'm smart and powerful and all those things. It's fascinating, all of the overlap there. But yeah, no, I don't think Andy Weir, like, again, very smart man in certain ways and just really tone deaf in others. But yeah, I think he will be remembered as someone who, for this time, wrote entertaining things. But I think someone like Nolan is going to be remembered a lot more because he is willing to like plant a flag in the sand, I think, and like say things that are, he's just trying to fucking say something right now, and that is leaning into the politics and not being afraid to cast trans people or people of color in this movie, to like make a point, So I don't think it's coincidental. But yeah, I love art that has something to say, especially about where we're at in a current like political societal moment. And again, it doesn't need to be super heavy handed like Weir's talking about and like stare directly into the camera and tell you exactly what you need to believe, which I think is what his critique of modern Star Trek is. Again, I haven't read the whole interview or listened to it, but I can imagine what his critique is. And sometimes stuff can be preachy, and that's annoying. But I think I would rather that than something that is just super wishy-washy. And so again, art is so malleable. It can be so many different things for so many different purposes. Like I'm looking at right here on my desk on my stack of books, I have Half His Age by Jeanette McCurdy, which is her novel that came out like I think this year or maybe last year. And it's just a really short, small scope novel about this young girl who has an affair with her teacher, like 17, and is obsessed with her like English teacher or whatever, and they have this affair. And again, it's the kind of thing that I think people could come to and say, well, this is romanticizing a relationship with a teacher, this abusive like toxic dynamic or whatever that should never happen. And again, I think that's coming at it from the wrong perspective. This is clearly, you know, Jeanette McCurdy, and people speculate, oh, this is about Jeanette McCurdy's relationship with this person or this person, because she was a child star, and just had a really rough go of it. If you don't know her story, definitely look it up. Um, she was on a show that I grew up watching, iCarly. So I'm very, interested in her because I feel like we grew up together almost, how parasocial relationships and everything. But like, I that conversation always really frustrated me about this book because it's like this is just her narrative interpretation, artistic interpretation of this type of thing. Like she's just telling you a story, and we can speculate about the exact things. Am I being hypocritical right now? Am I? Hold on. I'm. This is me again, stream of consciousness. But like, I'm saying this is not a book where she's necessarily saying something specific. It's just an interpretation of this type of dynamic that I'm sure feels true to her in certain ways. So, that's a different purpose with the art, right? But yeah, I don't know. Something like this is just clearly Weir had a lot of like really interesting ideas of like what would it look like if we encountered alien life, and he's interested in the biomechanics of those creatures and how they would have evolved given different environmental circumstances, and like that's super interesting. Um and yeah, I guess if you look at the Odyssey, because that's path that has been tread so often, it's one of the most told stories we've ever had as people. Like it's more rife for specific narrative interpretation that has an artist like sort of thesis statement and their dramatic question and all of that. I think that's a little bit more rife for that. And Nolan clearly wanted to say something about the time we live in, which I appreciate. So anyway, those are just a couple of examples, I guess, of just the different things that art can do and the different purposes it can serve. Because you also have like conservative media that is like very clearly preaching and has a very specific idea that they want you. I'm thinking of like those shitty Christian movies that they make that really only want you to interpret them one way and have no wiggle room and are so overly obvious, yeah, that stuff is frustrating because I think we want to come to art as like thoughtful, autonomous, sentient beings and like be able to interpret it the ways that we want and bring our own thing to it. So anyway, again, I don't know if any of this made sense. Hopefully you gleaned something from this, but I guess my point, if I had to put a cap on this, is that I am fascinated by just the infinite possibility of what art can be and the experiences it can give us and the way that people bring themselves to it and what they want from it, and then get frustrated when art doesn't do what they want. Like all of that will always be so interesting to me and will continue to be the course of study for the rest of my life, because this is my jam. So anyway, I hope this was interesting to some people in the way this was interesting to me. I hope I hope that you could get anything from this. This is the longest video that I've ever made, I think, on here. Clearly I had a lot to say. But in terms of personal stuff, I'm still continuing to do well, and excited for a new chapter I'm about to get into with moving into a new place with my best friend. And but I'm just continuing to try and engage with the things that I love and take care of myself, and I'm doing a decent job of that. Thank God, finally. So anyway, I hope everybody's good. I hope everybody is taking care of themselves in this arduous time. I hope that you have things that you love and art that you're engaging with that you find fascinating. Thanks for listening if you made it this far. Oh my God. And yeah, I will talk to you soon. I'm going to end it here. Okay, bye. Talk to you soon. Bye.